Imagine you were playing a city-building game like Civilization, but you spawn in a swamp. You have no oil, no gold. You don't even have enough fresh water to survive. And to make it worse, your neighbors just kicked you out of the alliance. In 1965, the founding Prime Minister of Singapore, Kuan Yew, cried on national television. Not because he was sad, but because the math said his country was dead. Many economists believed Singapore had almost no chance of survival. But today, Singapore has a higher GDP per capita than the United States, Switzerland, and even oil-rich nations. So how did a tiny island with nothing become one of the richest countries on Earth? This isn't a story about luck. It's a story about decisions most countries refuse to make. To understand the miracle, you first have to understand the mess. In 1819, the British founded Singapore as a free port. For 140 years, Singapore served as a major British trading port where opium trafficking was legal and common. The British got rich and the locals got addicted. But in 1965, the British left, and Singapore was kicked out of Malaysia. Singapore didn't gain independence, it was forced into it. The island was just 278 square miles, smaller than New York City. No army, no food security, no water supply, no money. Unemployment was above 10%. Population density was skyrocketing. Thousands of people crammed into squatter slums per square kilometer. Racial tensions were boiling over after violent riots just years earlier. Foreign investors saw Singapore as a risky, unstable port. And to make things worse, Singapore's neighbors, Malaysia and Indonesia, weren't exactly friendly. Malaysia had just expelled Singapore from their federation. Indonesia was conducting military raids along the border. Most experts predicted Singapore would fail within years. Kuan Yew himself said, "We knew that if we were just going to exist, let alone succeed, we had to be extraordinary." So, they activated the protocol.
Level 1. Survival. The poison shrimp. Before you can build an economy, you have to ensure you won't be deleted. In 1965, Singapore was surrounded by Malaysia and Indonesia, neighbors who were hostile to its existence. Kuan Yew knew he couldn't ask them for help, so he activated a foreign policy hack. He secretly called the only other country surrounded by enemies, Israel. Israeli military advisors flew in, disguised as Mexican agricultural consultants, to avoid upsetting Singapore's Muslim neighbors. They built the Singapore Army from scratch. They implemented national service, forcing every male, rich or poor, to serve. This was the poison shrimp strategy. The logic was simple. We are small, but if you try to eat us, we will kill you from the inside. With defense secured, they had to solve the next bug: water. Singapore imported almost all its water from Malaysia. If the tap turned off, the country would have died in 48 hours. This wasn't just an economic problem, it was a gun to their head. So they began a decades-long project to turn the entire island into a rain catchment and recycle sewage into drinking water. They turned a vulnerability into a technology stack. Today, Singapore meets 90% of its water needs through reservoirs, desalination, and new water. Recycled wastewater so clean it exceeds WHO standards.
Level 2. The hardware. The factory hack. Survival was secured, but the people were still starving. In the 1960s, most newly independent countries were suspicious of foreign corporations. They wanted to protect local industries and keep foreigners out. Kuan Yew looked at the map and did the exact opposite.
He realized Singapore couldn't compete on cheap labor, natural resources, or a large domestic market. The only way to grow was to invite the world's best companies to set up shop and become the world's employee. What Singapore offered: low corporate taxes, zero corruption, enforced contracts, skilled workforce, English as the business language. While other countries sold promises, Singapore sold execution, making it easy for multinational corporations. The strategy worked. By the 1970s, American tech giants like Texas Instruments and HP were manufacturing in Singapore. European banks set up regional headquarters there. Oil refineries chose Singapore as their Asian base. Foreign direct investment poured in, and with it came jobs, technology, and expertise. Unemployment crashed from 10% to nearly zero. Singapore became the server room for the global economy. They paired this with a massive bet on infrastructure. Singapore sits at one of the most strategic locations on Earth, right at the crossroads between the Indian Ocean and the South China Sea. Every year, trillions of dollars in trade pass through these waters. They doubled down on this geography. Lee turned Singapore into the world's most efficient port. He invested heavily in infrastructure, eliminated bureaucracy, and made it incredibly easy for ships to dock, unload, and leave. Singapore provided faster ports, better logistics, minimal friction. Ships stopped because it was efficient, not forced. Today, Singapore is the world's second busiest port by cargo tonnage. 1/5 of the world's shipping containers passes through it. Singapore didn't stop at shipping. It built Changi Airport to become a global aviation hub. The goal wasn't just to serve Singapore, it was to connect the entire world. Changi has been named the world's best airport multiple times. It's so well designed that people actually enjoy layovers there. The outcome was Singapore becoming indispensable to global trade.
Level 3. The operating system. The infinite money loop. But attracting companies created a dangerous new bug. You can't run high-tech factories with workers who live in low-tech slums. Slums breed disease, and more dangerously, they breed riots. To keep the American companies happy, Singapore needed absolute order. Lee also knew that social stability was essential. His theory was simple: a man who owns his home doesn't burn it down. So Singapore launched the Housing Development Board, HDB. The government bulldozed the slums and built affordable, high-quality public housing. Today, over 80% of Singaporeans live in HDB flats, and most of them own their homes. This created a stable, middle-class society with low crime and a high stake in stability. They went further. Kuan Yew believed that for a country to stay peaceful, people couldn't just live near each other. They had to live with each other. He didn't want Chinese neighborhoods or Malay neighborhoods because he knew that when people stay in their own bubbles, they start to fear and distrust outsiders. He implemented the ethnic integration policy. The government set a simple rule for every apartment building. The mix of people in the building had to match the racial mix of the whole country. This meant you couldn't pick a neighborhood just to be with your own kind. Instead, your next-door neighbor might be Malay, the family across the hall might be Indian, and the kids playing downstairs would be from every background. By forcing people to share the same elevators, hallways, and playgrounds, Singapore turned strangers into neighbors. It traded the danger of divided neighborhoods for the safety of a united community. And that peace of mind is exactly why the world's biggest companies feel safe putting their money there. Then came the financing. Singapore created the Central Provident Fund, a mandatory savings program. The government forced every single worker, by law, to save a massive chunk of their salary, historically up to 50%, into a state-managed fund. It sounds like a nightmare. Imagine earning $2,000 but only taking home $1,000. But it worked like an infinite money glitch. The government took that cash, built world-class airports and housing debt-free, and then let citizens use those same savings to buy the apartments back. As a result, Singaporeans have one of the highest savings rates in the world, and the government had a massive pool of capital to invest in infrastructure.
Level 4. The software.
Education. Singapore had no natural resources, so Lee decided to make people the resource. Singapore built one of the world's best education systems. It wasn't just about fast memorization, it was about creating a workforce that could compete globally. They asked one question: what skills will make us useful to the world? Then they built schools around that answer. Engineers, accountants, technicians, managers. They prioritized math, science, and technical skills that plugged directly into global demand. They gave scholarships to send top students abroad, with requirements to return. But the most controversial update was the grand bilingual policy. Singapore had a population that spoke a dozen different dialects: Malay, Tamil, Hokkien, Cantonese. This was inefficient for global business. So, Kuan Yew forced a hard reset. He forced the entire nation to switch its operating language to English. Why? Because English is the language of money. It allowed a Singaporean worker to plug directly into a global corporation without friction. But to prevent a total loss of culture, students were required to learn their mother tongue as a second language. They effectively programmed the population to be global employees by day and traditional Asians by night.
Level 5. The firewall. Trust and control. A rich country usually attracts corruption. Singapore's leaders made a brutal choice. They decided corruption would not be tolerated at any level. First, they paid government ministers like CEOs. The Prime Minister of Singapore earns roughly $1.6 million a year, far more than the US president. Salaries for government officials were raised to world-class levels to remove temptation. The logic? If you pay people enough, they have no reason to steal. But for those who did steal, the punishment was total deletion. Kuan Yew established the Corrupt Practices Investigation Bureau with sweeping powers. It could investigate anyone, including government ministers. The rules were simple. Public officials had to declare their assets. Gifts above a small amount were illegal. Even the appearance of conflict of interest was punished. Corruption cases didn't end careers. They ended reputations permanently. When a minister of national development was caught taking bribes, he committed suicide rather than face the shame. The message was clear. Nobody was above the law. This created something rare: trust. Businesses trusted the government. Citizens trusted institutions. Foreign investors knew their money was safe. Today, Singapore consistently ranks as one of the least corrupt countries in the world, usually in the top 5 alongside Nordic countries. This obsession with order extended to the streets. They banned chewing gum to keep the trains clean. Because of their opium history, they swung to the extreme. They passed the Misuse of Drugs Act. If you are caught trafficking beyond a specific limit, the penalty is not prison. It is mandatory death. Western media called it a police state. Kuan Yew called it quality control. He famously said, "If I have to choose between your freedom to chew gum and my people's right to a clean train, I choose the train."
The legacy and the trade-off. Kuan Yew stepped down in 1990 and passed away in 2015. In most dictatorships, when the strong man dies, the country collapses. But Singapore didn't, because they didn't build a personality cult. They built a system. Power passed smoothly to Goh Chok Tong, then to LKY's son Lee Hsien Loong, and now to Lawrence Wong. The pilot changed, but the machine kept flying. Singapore in 1965. GDP per capita around $500. Slums, poverty, no real economy. Singapore today? GDP per capita over $82,000, higher than the US, UK, and most of Europe. One of the world's major financial centers, home to thousands of multinational corporations. Life expectancy 84 years, one of the highest in the world.
consistently low unemployment, crime rate among the lowest globally. Singapore transformed from a poor, unstable island into one of the richest and most stable countries on Earth in just one generation. Whew! Of course, Singapore's success came with trade-offs, limited political freedom. The same party, PAP, has ruled since independence, strict controls on media and public assembly. High cost of living. Housing is expensive. Cars are absurdly expensive. A Toyota Camry can cost $100,000. High-pressure, competitive society. The nanny state that regulates behavior. Fines for everything. Littering, jaywalking, not flushing toilets. Critics argue Singapore sacrificed freedom for prosperity. Supporters argue it created safety, stability, and opportunity. The debate continues. Singapore's story is extraordinary because it defied all odds. No natural resources, tiny size, hostile neighbors, yet it became one of the world's great success stories. The formula? Strategic location, world-class infrastructure, zero corruption, massive investment in people, openness to foreign investment, and pragmatism over ideology. But here's the real question. Could Singapore's model work elsewhere? Or was it a one-time miracle? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this, check out my video on the first ever market crash that outsmarted Newton, and subscribe for more stories.